This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on COP28 Summit, India's commitment to tackle climate change. The participants are Dr. C.K. Varshney, Environmentalist, and Rajesh Leikh, anchor.
The world's most crucial annual climate change summit, COP28, in Dubai will be attended by prominent leaders from member countries. The summit will be held from November 30 to December 12, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, King Charles III, UK PM Rishi Sunak are expected to attend the summit along with dozens of other world leaders and 70,000 attendees. US Vice President Kamala Harris will attend the Global Climate Summit in Dubai after US President Joe Biden has backed out. In the given scenario, Dr. Varshney, what is the agenda of COP28?
COP28 is the 28th meeting of the parties of the Convention of Climate Change, which means that this meeting is going to really assess the kind of progress that the humanity has made towards controlling climate change and reducing carbon dioxide emission. In particular reference to the decisions made at the Paris summit, where it was agreed that the global temperature preferably to be kept at 1.5 degree centigrade above the pre-industrial level of the global temperature. And this is the main exercise, that how we can cut down our use of fossil fuels, which are primarily responsible for emission of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, and creates the kind of problem which popularly results in climate change, which is affecting one and all around the globe. And differentially, it is far more taxing and stressing and actually threatening the poor in the developing countries, and poorest of all are the worst sufferer of this climate change. While the developed countries and more prosperous people are primarily the major consumers of the energy and for emission of carbon dioxide. So I think here is a problem, that there is a group of people which are very small in number and which are limited in terms of their population, are responsible for huge emission of carbon dioxide, both currently and historically. And this leads to climate change, which is affecting the large communities in the developing world, which have very little to do with the carbon emission, but are primarily recipient of the consequences of climate change in terms of drought, in terms of warming environment, heat strokes, heat spells, floods, lightning, forest fire, reduced crop productivity, and excessive problem of water use. So I think these are the consequences.
Yes, Dr. Varshney, you very rightly said that regarding the fossil fuels, and also the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also said that the COP28 climate conference should aim for a complete phase out of fossil fuels. He warned of total disaster on humanity's current trajectory, and I like his comment where he says it is going to be a pity if we stay vague on this and non-committal throughout the phase down, which really means that we need to take concrete steps as to how we can phase out of fossil fuels. My question to you, Dr. Varshney, is that how feasible, how possible is the complete phase out of the fossil fuels?
First of all, I will say that the situation with respect to climate change is very critical. And it is time that we should really take very committed steps and reduce the emission of carbon dioxide. With respect to the fossil fuel usage, I think there is a big problem, because there is a lot of hypocrisy in this. I will just explain very quickly that most of the developed countries, which are primary consumers of large amounts of fossil fuel currently as well as historically, have really pumped in huge sums of money for exploring more hydrocarbon resources. And trillions of dollars have been committed for opening up new areas for oil drilling and for gas. So I think this is a problem. Once we are quite clear that excessive carbon dioxide emission is a villain and creating not only climate change but change in everything, in our attitude, in our health scenario, in everything that you can think of. There is no phase of human life which is not affected by climate change. This kind of a situation which is becoming increasingly more intense, and at the same time we find that huge amount of subsidies are being doled out by the developed countries for fishing as well as for other energy use. So I think here is a problem, and I think we have to be serious about it rather than really making everybody responsible and make others suffer from this climate change. As regard the question of complete knockout of the fossil fuel, yes, this is a desirable objective, but it cannot be done overnight. We have to really phase down gradually. But the real emphasis should come for alternative fossil fuel, alternatives to the fossil fuels, energy sources, such as solar, wind, green hydrogen, as well as many other biofuels, which have a high promise to chip in to meet our growing demands and the current demand of energy required for green development and for equitable development and for some kind of, access to safe and clean energy to the people to survive, for their well-being and for their growth.
Okay. Dr. Varshney, the COP28 is, as you very rightly mentioned, is expected to push the goal of limiting long-term global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and this was agreed by nearly 200 countries in Paris in 2015. Now, 1.5 degrees Celsius target is crucial to avoid the most damaging impacts of climate change, and this is according to the UN's climate body, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Given this scenario, how is this year's COP expected to discuss to limit the climate change and prepare for the future of climate change?
I think you are right that we have to take very drastic steps, which means that it really affects the lifestyle of the people. First of all, the overconsumption of energy, that is luxurious consumption of energy, has to be cut down, which means that the lifestyle has to change. And this is a very big readjustment that has to be made by countries, societies which are energy guzzlers or which are having a free use of energy to support their living style. So this is number one. Second, that a shift has to be made for non-fossil fuel sources of energy to meet our future requirements and current requirements. So I think a gradual energy transition has to take place. And it has to take place fast, because 1.5 degree objective of climate change is from the time when industrialization was not there. So when we compare pre-industrialization temperature, it should not increase over 1.5 degrees centigrade, as you have rightly said. Otherwise, the consequences are very severe and are uncontrollable. A drastic cut in the emission is required, and the ways it can be done are available. Okay. The only question is that we have to be honest in our effort, and we have to be truthful in really implementing the kind of commitments that we have made.
From India's point of view, Dr. Varshney, climate change has been a focal point during India's G20 presidency, and the upcoming COP28 presents a chance for India to build on these achievements. And also Prime Minister Modi is also expected to pitch its Global Biofuel Alliance, which was launched during the G20 summit in New Delhi at the COP28. What is your take? Can India stand towards its commitment of achieving net zero by 2070, reaching the nation's non-fossil energy capacity of 500 gigawatts and meeting 50% of our energy requirements for renewable energy by 2030? Is this possible?
I think you are right that this Global Alliance for Bioenergy has been proposed, and it is only with a view to really make a global contribution to the problem. We have also earlier proposed the Solar Alliance, which has already become a very strong movement and a platform. And similarly, this is there. So likewise, we have been promoting the use of alternatives to the fossil fuels. A green hydrogen is another energy source, which we are working very hard. And our energy efficiency is going to progressively becoming better and better. Per unit of GDP, our energy efficiency is increasing. And all this really amounts to that by 2070, it is very likely that we will achieve the target of net zero. But we should really see that the other countries have also to fulfill their commitment. And we have to see that the global community as a whole really comes together and have a common objective without wavering to really cut down the use of fossil fuels. It is something which cannot be done overnight, but a process has to be created by which progressively its use is reduced and finally it is completely stopped. We run our earth and the activities of human society on non-fossil fuel energy sources. Solar energy is available in plenty. Prime Minister Modi has also suggested a proposal which is known as LIFE at the Glasgow meeting, which means that living with the environment, for the environment. An individual is responsible and collectively the global population is responsible the total emission of carbon dioxide, which is causing the climate change. So if each individual becomes little energy conservator and is a proactive mode, then it is possible that individual consumption, if reduced, then the global consumption gets reduced and thus the global warming becomes less and carbon dioxide emission also comes down.
Yes. And for our listeners, the Global Biofuel Alliance, which includes top producers Brazil and the US, is expected to help build the worldwide market for trade in biofuel, which is obtained from biomass. Now, coming back to COP28, what we have heard is that the world is currently on track for about 2.4 degrees Celsius to 2.7 degrees Celsius of warming by 2100. As a result, the window for keeping the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit in reaching is rapidly narrowing. What is your take? And also keeping in mind that what UAE is saying, and since they happen to be the chair this on the COP28, the host UAE is also expected to announce a commitment from major oil and gas companies to reduce methane leakage. Your comment, Dr. Varshney, on this?
Methane is another greenhouse gas which has an impact many times more than carbon dioxide. And it is being emitted largely from the petroleum operations. Pipelines are leaking. And the satellite imageries have shown that the leakage is extensive in terms of facilities which are dealing with drilling and piping of the petroleum and the refinery wherever they are being refined. And all this is huge. Certain amount of methane is also given by rice paddies. But the main amount which is really coming out is because of the extensive network of piping through which the petroleum products are sent. And if we are able to contain the methane emission, which is growing and which has got 80 times more global warming impact as compared to carbon dioxide, then the closing window about which you mentioned can be made to remain open for little more time, which will give us little breathing time for a smooth, or I should say for effective energy transition, by which the fossil fuel consumption can be reduced and thus we will be able to contain the rapid march of the temperature.
Okay. Dr. Varshney, in closing, will say that COP28 will focus on fast-tracking the move to clean energy sources to cut greenhouse gas emissions before 2030. And besides, it will also look into getting money for climate finance from richer to poor countries and working on a new deal for developing nations. And on that note, Dr. Varshney, we thank you very much for being with Akashvani.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on COP28 Summit, India's commitment to tackle climate change. The participants were Dr. C.K. Varshney, Environmentalist, and Rajesh Leikh, Anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com